"Choose," she said. "Either me or your mother." Not shouted, not whispered. Said plainly, like the answer was already decided and this was just a formality. We were sitting in my living room when she said it. The same room where birthdays were celebrated, where grief was carried quietly, where I had prayed more nights than I could count. I looked at my son. I waited for him to laugh it off. I waited for him to say she'd gone too far. I waited for him to remind her whose house we were sitting in. Instead, he stayed quiet. The silence stretched longer than it should have. Long enough for me to understand that this wasn't about emotions running high. This was about power. About who was being pushed out and who was being claimed. He didn't turn toward me when he answered. He didn't clear his throat or explain himself. He just said her name and nodded once. Almost polite. That was it. No defense. No hesitation. "No, Mama." Just a choice made without looking back. And in that moment, something settled inside me with absolute certainty. I wasn't being accused. I wasn't being corrected. I was being removed. Quietly. Cleanly. Like an old chair someone decided no longer fit the room. Have you ever felt that shift? That instant where love suddenly comes with conditions. Where your presence becomes inconvenient instead of valued. If you've ever given everything to someone and realized you were now expected to disappear, you already know how heavy that kind of silence feels. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't remind him of the years that came before this moment. I didn't list sacrifices or ask for gratitude. I stood up, smoothed my dress, and walked down the hallway toward my room. Behind me, nobody stopped me. They thought that was the end of it. Before we go any further, stay right here with me. Stories like this aren't just told to pass time, they teach you how things really work. If you haven't yet, like the video and subscribe. What comes next is the part most people never see until it's too late. Packed my things. But not the way they expected. Before anyone ever told me to choose, before voices hardened and doors closed, there was a life that had already been spent holding things together. My name is Bernice Holloway. I'm 72 years old, and everything I am today was shaped long before my son became a husband. When Darnell was 12, his father died on a city bus route. Leon had kissed his coffee mug goodbye that morning, joked about it being too strong, and promised he'd call on his break. He never did. By afternoon, I was sitting across from strangers using words I didn't understand, signing papers that changed the rest of my life. Grief didn't give me time to fall apart. A child still needed to eat. Rent was still due. Survival didn't wait for tears. That's when everything narrowed. Not dreams. Not comfort. Just what had to be done. I took a night job at a nursing facility in Southfield, cleaning rooms and helping residents who reminded me of where time eventually takes us all. On weekends, I cleaned office buildings downtown. The kind where nobody notices you unless something is missing. I slept in pieces. My knees ached before I turned 50. Some mornings I prayed sitting down because standing felt like too much. But my son had shoes. His school fees were paid. He slept without fear. That mattered more than rest. Years later, when I qualified for a widow's housing program, I didn't celebrate. Filled out forms. Waited. I answered questions. I signed more papers. And when I finally held the keys to that modest brick ranch near 8 Mile, I didn't see walls and windows. Saw safety. Stability. A future that didn't depend on anyone else showing up. My name went on that deed. Only mine. I paid the mortgage alone. Every payment came from hours spent on my feet. Every repair came from money I could have used to make life easier. When the water heater failed, I replaced it. When taxes went up, I adjusted. When the roof needed work, I found a way. That house didn't come from luck. Came from endurance. Darnell grew up there. He brought friends home. Did homework at the kitchen table. Learned what consistency looked like without ever having to name it. I never once reminded him that the house was mine. Ownership didn't need to be announced when respect was present. That's what people misunderstand about sacrifice. You don't keep score. You assume love will remember. Years passed. My son became a man. He married. And when he and his wife asked to stay for a little while, I said yes without hesitation. Mothers like me are taught that saying no is selfish, even when we're tired. I believed that opening my home again was part of the same commitment I'd made decades earlier. What I didn't know then was how quickly comfort can turn memory soft. How easily someone can sit on furniture they didn't earn and start believing it was always theirs. How fast sacrifice fades once it stops being inconvenient. How entitlement doesn't arrive loud. It arrives confident. If this feels familiar, you're not alone. Many of us were taught to give without limits and stay quiet when lines get crossed. We were told endurance was the same thing as love. But comfort has a way of erasing memory. By the time Patrice entered my life, the house already had a rhythm. Not a loud one. Settled one. It moved at the pace of someone who had worked long enough to value quiet. Darnell grew up in that rhythm. He knew where things belonged. He knew which spaces mattered. Or at least I thought he did. Patrice noticed everything the moment she stepped inside. Not in an admiring way. In a measuring way. Like someone walking through a space and deciding how it could be improved once the right person took charge. She was controlled. Confident. Strategic in the way she spoke. Nothing wasted. Nothing emotional. She dressed sharp, talked clean, and carried herself like someone used to being listened to. When she smiled, it was precise. When she thanked me, it sounded practiced. When they asked to move in, she made sure to frame it carefully. Just temporary. Temporary until they saved more money. Temporary until housing prices settled. Temporary until something better came along. That word followed her through every conversation like insurance. A reminder that she wasn't settling, she was waiting. First, the changes were easy to excuse. One afternoon, I came home to find my kitchen rearranged. Cabinets reorganized. Pots moved. Labels where memory used to be. Patrice stood there and explained she was making things more efficient. She spoke like she was doing me a favor. She never asked. She assumed permission came with proximity. A week later, I went looking for my prayer corner. Had been there for years. A small table near the window. My Bible. A cloth passed down from my mother. It wasn't decoration. It was where I went when my knees hurt too much to stand and my heart needed somewhere to sit. Patrice needed that space, she said. For an appliance. Something modern. Something useful. I said nothing. Then came the public moments. She corrected my stories when company was over. Adjusted my words mid-sentence. Smiled while doing it so anyone watching would think she was helping. If I cooked, she explained alternatives. If I shared memories, she added context. She never raised her voice. She didn't have to. Authority doesn't shout when it believes it belongs. I started noticing how often she spoke for the both of them. We've been thinking. We don't really do things that way. That doesn't work for us. And slowly the language shifted. Not your house, but our house. Not your living room, but our space. Not your rules, but what makes sense now. The first time she said it, I looked at my son. I expected him to step in, clarify, to remember where we were sitting and whose name was on the papers tucked away in my drawer. He didn't. Darnell smiled instead. That careful, tired smile people use when they want peace without responsibility. He avoided eye contact, changed the subject, let the moment pass. That became his habit. When Patrice made decisions, he stayed quiet. When she crossed lines, he softened it later. When I spoke up, he told me she didn't mean harm. Neutrality, I learned, always sides with the person doing the taking. As weeks passed, Patrice hosted people I didn't know without asking. Furniture I had owned for decades moved without discussion. Conversations about the future happened in front of me as if I were temporary too. Once, she laughed and mentioned selling the house someday. She said it lightly like a joke. I noticed she was watching my face when she said it. I warned my son once. Not loudly. Not angrily. I told him I felt pushed aside. He told me I was overthinking. He told me I should be proud he had a strong wife. He told me not to create problems. That's when I understood. Patrice wasn't trying to hurt me. She was repositioning me. Have you ever watched someone erase you slowly? Not with cruelty, but with confidence. A small adjustment here. Quiet decision there. Until one day, you realize your place has already been reassigned. Patrice didn't rush. She didn't need to. She had patience, control, and a man who believed silence kept things balanced. Pay attention. This matters later. Because after months of quiet changes and swallowed discomfort, she finally stopped editing herself. Then she finally said the quiet part out loud. It was a Sunday evening when it happened. The kind that usually carries a soft ending to the week. Dinner dishes done. Shoes lined by the door. The house settled into that quiet that comes after routine, when everyone assumes nothing important is left to say. We were sitting in the living room. Patrice across from me. Darnell beside her. No tension in the air that anyone would admit to. No raised voices. No warning. That's what made it worse. Patrice folded her arms and spoke like she had rehearsed it somewhere private. This isn't working, she said. Her tone wasn't angry. It wasn't emotional. It was firm, like a decision already made. She looked at my son, not at me. I need to know where you stand. Darnell shifted on the couch. He didn't ask what she meant. He didn't interrupt. Then she said it. Choose, she said. Either me or your mother. No yelling. No shaking voice. No hesitation. Just a sentence placed in the room like it belonged there. I didn't respond right away. Not because I was shocked, but because I was watching. I wanted to see if my son would stop her. If he would say this wasn't fair. If he would remind her where she was sitting. If he would say my name without being prompted. I looked at him. He didn't look back. The silence that followed wasn't brief. It stretched. Long enough for me to understand that this wasn't about emotions spilling over. This was a test. A demand dressed up as loyalty. Patrice didn't repeat herself. She didn't need to. She waited with the confidence of someone who believed the outcome was already hers. Darnell cleared his throat. Still didn't look at me. He said her name. And nodded. That was all. No explanation. No apology. No acknowledgement of what he was choosing against. Just agreement. In that moment, something inside me shifted into focus. Not anger. Not sadness. Understanding. Clear and sharp. I wasn't being challenged. I was being removed. This wasn't about disagreement. It was about space. About who stayed and who was pushed aside. I realized then that if I spoke, I would only be begging for something that should have been given freely. Respect asked for isn't respect at all. So I stood up. Slowly. I smoothed my dress. I didn't look at Patrice. I didn't say my son's name. I walked down the hallway toward my room. Each step steady, each breath controlled. Behind me no one followed. That told me everything I needed to know. Before we go further, let me ask you something. What would you have done in my place? Would you have argued? Would you have stayed quiet? Or would you have walked away the moment you realized the decision had already been made? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't list sacrifices or history. I didn't need to. Because clarity doesn't collapse. That was the moment I decided to leave. I packed the way someone packs when they don't plan on returning for favors. Slowly. Deliberately. No rushing. No second guessing. I pulled the old brown suitcase from the top shelf and laid it open on the bed like it had been waiting for this moment. Chose what mattered. Few dresses I wore often. My Bible. Photographs that still knew my hands. I left the furniture. I left the dishes. I left the things that could later be used to say I owed something or took too much. I didn't want confusion. I wanted clean lines. Darnell stood in the doorway while I folded my clothes. He kept shifting his weight, opening his mouth, then closing it again. He said, "Mama, you don't have to go like this." But he never said, "Stay." He never said, "This is your home." Silence kept doing the work for him. Behind him, Patrice hovered. She pretended to scroll through her phone, but I could feel her satisfaction filling the room. She wasn't celebrating out loud. She didn't need to. Her victory was quiet, efficient, an obstacle removed. When I zipped the suitcase shut, she finally spoke. "You can leave the keys on the counter," she said. Not sharp, not rude, just final. I picked them up from the table by the door and placed them beside the fruit bowl. Gently. No tossing. No hesitation. I didn't tell them where I was going. I didn't tell them I had already spoken to my cousin Odessa. I didn't explain anything. Explanations are invitations. I wasn't inviting debate. Darnell hugged me before I left. His arms were stiff, unsure. He smelled like a cologne Patrice bought him. When he pulled back, he said, "We'll talk soon." The door closed before I reached the sidewalk. That first night away, I slept on a pull-out couch. The ceiling fan clicked softly, and I stared at it longer than I should have. People expect heartbreak to break you open. Mine didn't. Sharpen me. There's a difference. Heartbreak makes you weak. Clarity makes you patient. The next morning, Patrice posted pictures online. New curtains. A rearranged living room. A caption about fresh beginnings. People commented with hearts and congratulations. She wanted the world to witness her progress. To mark territory. To make my absence look like improvement. What she didn't know was that not everything follows you just because you leave. Some paperwork stays where it's legally required. Some accounts don't move without consent. Some names don't disappear because someone else feels entitled. I watched quietly as the days passed. A week later, Darnell called asking where the water bill information was. I told him I'd check. 2 weeks later, an insurance representative called me directly to confirm an occupancy change. I answered calmly. Yes, I had moved out. No, ownership hadn't changed. I didn't rush. I didn't warn them. I didn't explain what that meant. There were documents I hadn't mentioned. Folders I had kept for decades. Copies made long before anyone thought they'd matter. And there were letters that still came addressed only to me, no matter who opened the mailbox. They celebrated my exit like it was the end of a chapter. If you're still here, stay with me. Like the video. Subscribe if you haven't. Because moments like this are where people stop paying attention. And that's when mistakes get expensive. They thought this was the end. It wasn't. Certain letters don't stop coming just because you leave. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, plain and unassuming, slipped in with the rest of the mail like it didn't carry weight. Beige envelope, typed address, my name printed clean and complete, no additions, no shared ownership, no confusion. Patrice opened it. She opened everything. She liked knowing what came into the house, even if it wasn't addressed to her. That habit had served her well until that moment. Darnell told me later she stood at the kitchen counter holding the letter, coffee cooling beside her, eyes moving slower with each line. It was from the city assessor's office. A routine notice about a reassessment inspection scheduled for the following month. Nothing dramatic, nothing alarming, until she turned the page. Attached behind the notice was a copy of the recorded deed. Included because of an internal update. My signature. My full name. The date stamped clearly. Filed decades earlier. No spouse listed. No additional owners. No transfers. No assumptions. Just me. Patrice didn't yell. She didn't throw the paper. She didn't call out to my son right away. According to Darnell, she just sat down. Quiet. Very still. The kind of stillness that tells you someone has realized they built plans on an idea that was never confirmed. She asked him one question. Why isn't your name on this house? He didn't have a strong answer. He told her he assumed it would be handled someday. That he never asked. That he trusted her to manage things. That he trusted me not to make it an issue. Trust, it turned out, wasn't a strategy. That evening, Patrice called me for the first time since I left. No greeting. No small talk. Straight to the point. We need to talk about the house, she said. Her voice was controlled. Professional. Like she was speaking to a colleague. Not the woman she had pushed out weeks earlier. She talked about making things official. about fairness, about putting Darnell's name on the paperwork so everyone felt secure. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I asked her one question. Why would I do that? The line went quiet. She hadn't expected resistance. She tried again, softer this time. Mention marriage, future plans, children, stability. Words meant to sound reasonable. I reminded her that she had already asked my son to choose, and that he had answered without hesitation. That changed her tone. She started mentioning laws, occupancy rights, what judges might consider. She didn't threaten directly. She didn't have to. She let the implications hang there, confident they would unsettle me. They didn't. I told her I had already spoken to a housing attorney in Detroit. I gave her the name. I told her calmly that she and my son were occupants, not owners. That occupancy does not equal control. That paperwork matters more than confidence. She hung up without saying goodbye. A few days later, Darnell called. His voice was tight. He said Patrice felt blindsided, that she was stressed, that maybe we could all sit down and clear things up. I told him there was nothing unclear. I told him adults don't issue ultimatums over property they don't own. That's when the calls stopped. 2 weeks later, a certified letter arrived at the house. Not addressed to my son. Not addressed to Patrice. Addressed to the occupants. 30 days. No emotion. No explanation. Just notice. If you're still listening, stay right here. Like the video. Subscribe if you haven't. This is why details matter. This is why assumptions cost more than questions. That's when the tone changed. Once that letter was opened, nothing inside the house stayed quiet. The notice wasn't addressed to my son. It wasn't addressed to his wife. It was addressed to the occupants. That single word changed the atmosphere overnight. Darnell told me later that Patrice read it 3 times before speaking. Not because she didn't understand it, but because she was trying to find a way around it. There wasn't one. 30 days was 30 days. No exceptions. No discussions. No feelings attached. The argument started that same night. Not about love. Not about family. About blame. Patrice accused Darnell of failing as a husband. Of never asking questions. Of assuming things he had no right to assume. He pushed back for the first time, telling her she was the one who forced the choice. Voices rose. Doors closed. Sleep became short and restless. The house didn't feel claimed anymore. Felt counted down. Patrice cried then. Not the controlled kind she saved for public moments. This was different. She told Darnell they were being pushed out. That I was punishing them. That I had embarrassed her. She asked him to fix it. To remind me of everything he'd been through. As if hardship cancels accountability. Darnell didn't call me that night. He showed up instead. He stood at my cousin Odessa's door like a child unsure whether he was welcome. His shoulders were low. His eyes were tired. Whatever confidence he had borrowed had worn off. He sat across from me at the table, hands shaking when he reached for the glass of water I poured. He kept calling me Mama, like the word itself might soften what was already decided. He told me Patrice was sorry. Not sorry for the ultimatum. Sorry it didn't work. He said the house felt heavy now. That every room reminded them of the deadline. That nothing they said to each other landed the way it used to. He asked me why I was doing this. I told him I wasn't. Then I said the truth he hadn't been ready to hear. I didn't raise you to protect me, I said. I raised you to respect me. And you failed at that. That was when he broke. Not loudly. Not for show. Just quiet tears, the kind that come when excuses stop working. He asked if there was anything he could do to make it right. I told him there was. I told him to let the notice stand. Patrice moved out first. Took what she brought and some things she didn't. Darnell stayed for a while, trying to hold on to a place that no longer wanted him there. By the time the final date arrived, he had already started sleeping somewhere else. I didn't go back for the lock change. I didn't need to. The message had already been delivered. We don't talk enough about boundaries in families, about how love without limits becomes permission, about how silence teaches the wrong lessons. Some lessons don't need raised voices. When I stepped back into my house, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a return to something I had been carrying long before anyone else tried to claim it. The air was different, lighter, not because nothing had happened but because nothing was being forced anymore. I didn't rush to make it look the way it used to. I let the rooms sit as they were for a while. Empty spaces have a way of telling you what belongs in them. I listened. I brought my things back slowly, one bag at a time, one decision at a time. I placed my chair near the window again. I rebuilt my prayer space where it felt right, not where it fit someone else's plan. I painted over marks that didn't belong to me and left the rest alone. Healing doesn't require erasing every trace. It requires reclaiming ownership. Peace came back in pieces. Mornings were quiet. Evenings felt steady again. The house stopped feeling watched. Stopped waiting for approval. My son didn't move back in. He didn't ask to. He visits now. He calls before he comes. He waits to be invited inside instead of assuming the door is open. When he speaks, he listens for answers instead of defenses. When I speak, he doesn't interrupt. That didn't happen overnight. Distance taught him what comfort never did. We still talk. Carefully. Honestly. Without pretending the past can be folded away neatly. Our relationship didn't end, but it changed shape. Some lessons don't disappear once they're learned. They stay so they won't need to be repeated. People ask me if I regret how things unfolded. I don't. This was never about anger. It was about truth. About learning that ultimatums show intentions clearly. That silence causes harm when it replaces responsibility. And that paperwork remembers what people forget once they feel entitled. If you're ever told to choose between your dignity and someone else's comfort, remember this. Comfort fades. Respect holds. Now I want to hear from you. Would you have done the same? Tell me in the comments. Before you go, if this story gave you something to think about, take a moment to like the video and share it with someone who might need it. Stories like these travel further when people pass them on. And if you value thoughtful stories about family, boundaries, and consequences, you're welcome to subscribe. We take our time here and we tell them honestly.